The summer air in Virginia was thick, humid, and heavy with silence. Yet, on the night of August 21st, 1831, that silence shattered with the crack of an axe against wood, the whisper of hurried footsteps, and the muffled cries of a family roused from sleep. A preacher named Nat Turner, enslaved since birth, had begun what history would call the bloodiest slave rebellion in American history. But to understand how such terror was unleashed, you must first step into the daily world of those bound in chains. In Southampton County, life for enslaved people was a cycle of endless toil. At dawn, the fields already pulsed with labor. Bent backs, cracked hands, and blistered skin told the story of cotton, corn, and tobacco planted not for survival, but for the wealth of others. Children carried water buckets heavier than their arms could bear. Women cooked not just for their own starving children, but for the master's tables as well. Nights brought little rest only. The faint hope whispered around cabin fires that one day God would hear their cries. Nat Turner was different. Born in 1800, he had been marked as unusual from the start. His mother, an enslaved woman named Nancy, believed him destined for something greater. He learned to read, a rare and dangerous gift in a world where teaching a slave to read was a crime. He devoured the Bible, committing passages to memory, and soon others looked to him not just as a fellow laborer, but as a preacher, someone who could take the words of Scripture and make them thunder with meaning. Nat spoke of visions, of signs in the sky, of an ancient justice waiting to strike down oppressors. Too many enslaved people. His words were more than sermons. They were lifelines, sparks in the darkness. Yet to the white slaveholders, Nat seemed a harmless oddity, a quiet man who prayed too much and caused too little trouble. Daily life, however, wore at the soul. Families torn apart by sales at the auction block, women abused in silence, men punished with whips that ripped skin like parchment. These injustices did not fade with time. They accumulated like storm clouds. And in Nat's mind, each lash, each cruelty, was recorded by the hand of God. When Nat looked at the sky, he saw omens. In 1831, he claimed to see an eclipse, a black sun swallowing the light. To him, it was a divine command. Rise up, strike, free your people. The stage was set, and as dusk fell on that fateful night, Nat Turner gathered a small band of men. Their weapons were crude axes, knives, farm tools. Their hearts pounded with fear and fury. For once, they would no longer bow, no longer whisper, no longer endure. The rebellion was about to begin. I remember that night as if the air itself trembled with what we were about to do. We moved through the shadows, silent as ghosts, carrying only the weapons we could find. Some carried hatchets, others clubs. My own hands gripped the handle of a blade, slick with sweat, heavy with the weight of destiny. The first house belonged to the Travis family, Nat's master. The lantern light inside flickered against the shutters. Nat raised his hand, signaling us forward. With one strike, the rebellion began. The family was killed in their sleep, quick, brutal, merciless. For the first time, the chains we wore felt like they had snapped, replaced by fire in our veins. We moved from house to house, farm to farm. Word spread among the enslaved. Rise up, join us, freedom is here. Some joined eagerly, eyes wide with hope, while others trembled, too afraid of what the white men's revenge would bring. By dawn, our band had swelled to nearly 70 strong. We rode horses taken from the plantations, shouting hymns of deliverance as we marched. But the rebellion was not simply about killing, it was about making a statement. For centuries, Enslaved voices had been silenced, bodies broken, humanity denied. Now, in those few hours, the oppressed spoke with actions louder than words. It was rage unleashed, a storm long contained. The fear spread faster than our footsteps. White families fled their homes, terrified by the thought of their enslaved laborers rising against them. In towns across Virginia, bells rang out, militias gathered, and the state erupted into panic. Yet, even within the rebellion, doubt crept in. I remember looking into the eyes of one man who had hesitated before striking. His whisper cut through the chaos. Will this truly set us free? Or will it only bring more chains? For 48 hours, blood stained the land. Nearly 60 white men, women, and children were killed. And in the midst of it all, Nat Turner's voice remained steady. He reminded us of Moses, of Jericho, of the God who promised freedom to his people. He believed this uprising was divinely ordained, but divinity alone could not stop the thunder of muskets. By the third day, militias, armed slave patrols, and even federal troops descended upon Southampton. We were outnumbered, outgunned, and exhausted. The rebellion scattered. Men who had once shouted freedom were now hunted like animals. Many were captured. Some were executed on the spot. Their bodies were left hanging in trees as warnings to others. Nat Turner vanished into the woods, a fugitive hiding in the swamps and thickets for nearly 2 months. The land itself seemed to swallow him, offering roots for food and shadows for shelter. But no man could stay hidden forever. In late October, Nat was captured. Shackled, paraded through the streets, he was brought before the court. The trial was swift. The sentence was death. On November 11th, 1831, Nat Turner was hanged, his body mutilated, his skin flayed. His remains were scattered, his very existence meant to be erased. But though Nat Turner was gone, the rebellion had carved scars into the American South that would never heal. The rebellion lasted barely 2 days, but its impact stretched across decades. For white Southerners, it was a nightmare come truthe, enslaved, rising in violence against their masters. Terror spread far beyond Southampton. Rumors multiplied, rebellions in other counties, slaves arming themselves, fires set in towns. Most of it was false, but the fear was real. The response was swift and brutal. Retaliation claimed far more lives than the rebellion itself. In the weeks after, militias and mobs slaughtered nearly 200 black men, women, and children, many of whom had no connection to Nat Turner at all. Their only crime was the color of their skin, the suspicion of defiance. Laws tightened like noose ropes. It became illegal for enslaved people to learn to read or write. Preaching was forbidden. Gatherings of black people, free or enslaved, were restricted. White Southerners doubled down on control, building a harsher system of surveillance and punishment. In their fear, they sought to smother every spark of rebellion. Yet history is never so easily silenced. For the enslaved, Nat Turner became more than a man. He became a symbol, a warning to slaveholders, a beacon to the oppressed. His name whispered in the dark cabins, carried in secret songs, remembered not as madness but as courage. And for America, the rebellion deepened the fault lines. Northern abolitionists pointed to Southampton as proof that slavery was not sustainable, that it bred violence, that human beings would always rise against oppression. Southerners, meanwhile, clung tighter to the institution, convinced it was the only way to maintain order. In this clash of fear and hope, the seeds of the Civil War were watered. 30 years later, those seeds would erupt into battlefields where the question of slavery could no longer be denied. When we look back on Nat Turner's rebellion, it is tempting to see only blood and terror. And yes, it was bloody, it was terrifying, but it was also the voice of the voiceless, a desperate cry for freedom in a land that denied them humanity. History remembers the rebellion as an act of violence, but for those who lived in chains, it was an act of defiance, of faith, of refusing to die quietly under the whip. And so, as we recall that summer of 1831, we must remember not just the fear it struck, but the courage it revealed. Nat Turner's rebellion did not end slavery, but it exposed its horrors to the world, and it proved that even the most oppressed would not remain silent forever. Because history is not only what happened, it is also what was endured, what was resisted, and what was dreamed of. And that is why Nat Turner's story must never be forgotten.